This morning, I sat down with U.S. Ambassador to Canada David Cohen for an exclusive broadcast interview before the specifics of those sanctions were announced. Here's part one of our conversation. Ambassador Cohen, it's great to meet you. Thank you for making the time for us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It's good to meet you. And if I can, congratulations on your return to the air.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. I, of course, have a number of questions about the relationship between our two countries, but I do want to start on the evolving and escalating situation in Ukraine and involving Russia. As a diplomat, do you think it is or it was at all naive of countries like the U.S. and Canada to believe that a diplomatic solution was possible with someone like Putin?
So I don't think it's naive. And I think it's rooted in our culture and our DNA as leading democratic countries in the world. When you're a leading democratic country, you always will want to pursue a nonviolent solution to your problems. You will always want to pursue diplomacy. That is what separates us from authoritarian regimes. So I don't think it's naive to try and maintain our principles and our deals as a leading democratic nation on earth. Whether it's going to work or not is a different issue, but we have not stopped preparing for a failure of the diplomatic solution. As I've said, the president has made quite clear that there is an array of sanctions that is in place and ready to be launched should Russia invade Ukraine, and that the pain and the agony that will be inflicted on Russia as a result of those sanctions will be something that is unprecedented in the modern history of the world. So that's not naively hoping that diplomacy works. It is being true to our democratic ideals that we will pursue diplomacy until it fails, and then we will not hesitate but to act decisively in imposing sanctions.
Despite, though, the threat of that from both the U.S. and its allies, Putin has been permitted, largely with little consequence, to build up between 100,000 and 190,000 forces around the borders of Ukraine. What responsibility does the U.S. and its allies bear for allowing that to happen?
Well, he's built that up within his own country. And I don't...
Does that make it okay?
Well, I think he has the right to do things within his own country that he doesn't have the right to do outside of his country. And it's one thing for us to say that we will not tolerate an invasion by Russia into Ukraine, which is its own sovereign nation. It's another thing to say that we're going to dictate military exercises and military deployments within the boundaries of Russia. So I think
even though when intelligence was showing and leaders were telling the public that the buildup of those forces was with that aim, with a more nefarious aim?
When you say, it's hard when you say the intelligence was showing. I don't know how to translate that. I don't know how to translate that. I think that it's hard to imagine what Russia was doing other than preparing to do something that we do not agree with. But whether preparing is worthy of the types of sanctions that the President and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of the Treasury and the United States government and the Canadian government have talked about is a different question. And again, I'm very proud of our leadership role as being a democracy in the world. By the way, I think it's one of the elements of the roadmap which will celebrate its one-year anniversary tomorrow between Canada and the United States, that two of the strongest and most committed democracies in the world could get together and to outline this blueprint of incredible ambition to advance our country's interests and the interests of democracy in the world. And that to me is so important that I'm willing to tolerate a lot of rope of authoritarian countries who don't share that perspective, as long as we're prepared to react in a strong and decisive way And I think that's where we are.
What do you mean by tolerate a lot of rope?
Like troop buildups in your own country.
So you're willing to tolerate that if the action is decisive when their actions change?
When they cross the line, and by the way, I would say this, I'm not trying to, I don't like squabbling with reporters, but you say amassed large number of troops on the border. How about if they just amassed a large number of troops in the country, which they've clearly been doing for a long time?
But there's a difference. I mean, there is a distinguishment there. The reason that they're near the border is because something could happen on the other side of that border.
Well, the reason they're in the country is because they might want to have something to do with those troops in the country. Not the point. Until they cross the border, they haven't violated international norms. They haven't violated any of their treaty commitments. And I don't think that they have taken the steps necessary to justify the imposition of the types of sanctions that we're preparing to impose.
So if some troops go in, but not all of them, right? Because now we're talking about two specific areas, for example, in Ukraine. That's the subject of the last 24 hours. Is it beyond what's already happened that would trigger a more forceful response from your vantage point?
Well, first of all, this is an ever-changing situation, and who knows where we'll be tomorrow morning, let alone where we are today. But number two, the president imposed sanctions today by executive order, targeted to these two particular territories. But he also announced, and the Secretary of State has announced, that more sanctions are coming. So I think the answer is that we have to give this time to play itself out. I can confirm to you that the United States is irrevocably committed to unleashing an unprecedented set of very difficult sanctions that will significantly injure the Russian government and the people of Russia in the event that Russia puts more troops into Ukraine.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.